Pakistan has to be designated by the United States to be a state sponsor of terror. Pakistan started the conflict with its support for terrorism. Indians were the victim of terrorism. Asim Munir should understand that the first rule of hole digging is when you're in a hole, stop digging. We haven't designated Pakistan itself as a state sponsor of terror. We see Prime Minister Modi and others across the Indian political spectrum doing is rallying to the realization that all Indians are under threat. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Munir. The fact of the matter is they live together successfully in India.
Michael Rubin, thank you so much for talking to ANI. How do you assess the current tension, at this point that's happening between the two countries, India and Pakistan?
Look, there is no moral equivalence between the two countries. Pakistan started the conflict with its support for terrorism. Indians were the victim of terrorism. While I was initially critical that Prime Minister Modi had taken so long to respond, in hindsight, it's clear that the Indian military was carefully planning, and the Indian military has shown itself to be far more capable. Pakistan is thrashing about, looking for a way to save face. But Asim Munir should understand that the first rule of hole digging is when you're in a hole, stop digging. As we look forward, while Pakistan is trying to perhaps ramp up tension in the hope that external diplomats while Army Chief Asim Munir is perhaps ramping up tension in the hope that external actors, perhaps the United States, perhaps China, perhaps both of them, will impose a quiet. The fact of the matter now, looking forward, there can only be one metric by which we look at the diplomatic solution to this issue. Pakistan has to be designated by the United States to be a state sponsor of terror. The fact that Pakistan, on one hand, sought plausible deniability for the actions of terrorists, but on the other hand is rallying to their defense, should be troubling to everyone in the world and eye-opening as well about the true nature of the Pakistani regime.
Right. You did talk about, U.S. must go out there and designate Pakistan. Lashkar-e-Toiba is that wing that the U.S. has done in the past. But, those at the funeral prayers across Pakistan, since the first missile attack happened from the Indian side, there were Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorists coming out there and attending those prayers. So these are U.S. designated outfits. Given U.S.'s zero tolerance policy on terrorism, do you think it's time to pressurize Pakistan? Do you think the government must, pressurize Pakistan and give them that India also has that right to defend themselves, as other nations have the right to defend themselves against terrorism?
First of all, let me clarify. While the United States has previously designated individual terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, we haven't designated Pakistan itself as a state sponsor of terror. It's time to stop designating the tentacles of the octopus and designate its head, period. Now, beyond that, absolutely, the United States should side unequivocally with India. The job of any democratic leader is to protect its citizenry. And what we see Prime Minister Modi and others across the Indian political spectrum doing is rallying to the realization that all Indians are under threat. Before this started, Asim Munir gave away his goal. He argued that Hindus and Muslims should not be able to live together. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Munir. The fact of the matter is they live together successfully in India. And the only reason that they no longer live successfully together in Pakistan is because Pakistan has systematically driven its minorities out of the country. Pakistan, where are your Sikhs? Pakistan, where are your Hindus? Pakistan, why are your Christians fleeing? The fact of the matter is, every time Pakistan fails inwardly, in terms of corruption, in terms of economy, in terms of society, its leadership turns its guns on its own minorities in order to distract the Pakistani people from the government's own failings. That is the playbook of a failed state. Fortunately, India has a different playbook, one in which all Indians thrive, and in which they openly discuss their issues and resolve them.
Right. Now, we not only just saw terrorists coming out, and attending funeral prayers, but we also saw Pakistani army leadership leading funeral prayers of terrorists that were killed in the Indian missile strike. What is your position on that? How do you see all of this?
Well, let me put it this way. Everyone in Pakistan must understand that if you are a terrorist, you don't cease becoming a terrorist by wearing an army uniform. The army uniform is not a way. If you are a terrorist, you do not cease being a terrorist by wearing an army uniform. You cannot put on an army uniform and escape accountability. This is the message which not only India should send, but every other country in the civilized world. China too must understand that it is playing with fire. The problem with embracing Islamism is you can believe that you can set a wildfire and it will only burn your enemies. But every single time a country has tried the strategy, the winds have shifted and the primary victims have been citizens of that country themselves. This happened in Saudi Arabia. They suffered blowback. It happened in Libya. It happened in Syria. And we now see Bashar al-Assad, which once worked fist and glove with Islamic terrorists in order to export terrorism into Iraq. We saw that those same terrorists led to his downfall. Frankly, it's going to happen to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Now, when the Pakistani military argues that they need billions of dollars because they suffer terrorism too, what they are not saying is that they themselves are the sponsors of that terrorism. You don't give an arsonist a can of gasoline. You don't give Pakistan another $1 billion at the IMF. It's the same thing.
Right. Michael, what role does nuclear deterrence play in limiting how far this conflict might escalate? What is your opinion or your impression on that?
Well, first of all, of course, the fact that both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers is a real worry. But unlike in 1999 with the Kargil War, now both India and Pakistan have a doctrine for the use of nuclear weapons. They have controls. They have a procedure. So unlike in 1999, there's no longer a fear that a single man could get angry, could be mentally unstable, could be like Asim Munir, and in order to save face, orders an attack. But behind the scenes, make no mistake, the reason why so many countries are going to be involved in trying to find a resolution is because of the fear of nuclear escalation. The danger here for India is this. If India self-deters, if they say the fear of escalation is reason not to engage, that itself would be a green light for Pakistan to continue terrorism. This is why I say that any negotiated solution, any stepping back from the brink in this case, has to involve Pakistan being designated a state sponsor of terror. Now, of course, Pakistani diplomats will take umbrage with this. But the answer to Pakistani diplomats should be the same answer that's given to every other country that has been designated a state sponsor of terror. For example, in the past, the government of Sudan. If you don't want to be a state sponsor of terror, stop sponsoring terrorism. It's that simple. Other countries have removed themselves from the list. Pakistan could too, but they need to engage in real reform.
Right. Now, let's just look a little, into the domestic politics that is playing in these two countries. How are domestic politics in both countries, India and Pakistan, influencing the leadership decisions regarding this conflict?
Well, look, India is a democracy, and India is acting logically. Its people demand that there be response so that this sort of terrorism doesn't happen again. And let's also make no mistake, Pogrom wasn't the first time that India has suffered terrorism on a mass scale. Within Pakistan, the dynamic is different. Pakistan truly turned towards radical Islamism in 1971 after the loss of Bangladesh. Because Pakistan, unlike India, has always been an artificial state. Jinnah believed that Pakistan would be an Islamic state, but in reality, he died young, and Pakistan is an amalgam of different nationalities, each of which have their identities. When the Bengalis succeeded in 1971 and Bangladesh was born, the lesson which the Pakistani leadership took, the lesson which the ISI took, was that if we allow people to have an ethnic identity, then our country is going to fall apart. We need to replace that identity with another identity based only on religion, because that's going to be the glue that holds our country together. It really is a devil's bargain. The problem in Pakistan today, however, is that the embrace of Islam which they take, first of all, simply provides cover for corrupt governance. Second of all, many Pakistanis resent the fact that for all of the Pakistani leaders' discussion of Islam, in reality, it's a Punjabi dictatorship. And whenever the Pashtun or the Baluch or the Sindhis or anyone else complains, Pakistan's response is either to start a war or to increase radical Islamism. It's a never-ending cycle, which is going to lead to disaster, hopefully not for the world, but certainly for Pakistan and all Pakistanis.
Right. Now, how are the third parties like, different countries, including the United States, China, and Russia responding to this situation that's developing every minute?
Well, first of all, China, I don't think, will be able to respond too productively, simply because China has very, very good relations with Pakistan, but not so much with India. Russia and the United States could actually work together much more here in terms of passing messages back and forth between the governments in order to have some sort of deconfliction. But this is the parallel which I don't think should occur. There's an obvious parallel to what happened in Kashmir, to what happened in Israel on October 7th, 2023. Now, the Israelis, before that massive attack, had a philosophy which they called mowing the grass. Because an all-out war in Gaza would be very costly, they believed that whenever they suffered a terrorist attack, they could degrade the Hamas terrorism with directed attacks on bomb-making and terror cells. And then that might buy them some months or even some years. But inevitably, the terror would regrow, and they would have to mow the grass again. After October 7th, the lesson the Israelis learned was, if you mow the grass, eventually you're going to suffer an attack which is too great to bear. You have to uproot the lawn. Now, India, moving forward, has a choice. They can mow the grass, at which point maybe the line of control will be quiet for 6 months or a year. But make no mistakes, the dynamics inside Pakistan are going to promote further terrorism. This is the time, if we're going to save lives, if the United States and Russia are going to help the Indians save lives, that part of the ceasefire deal has to be no more terrorism. Not in rhetoric, but in reality. And you know what? There's no moral equivalence here. India does not engage in terrorism as a tool of state policy, nor as any other tool. For Pakistan, it's not simply the tool of state policy. Increasingly, it's become the entire character of the state.
Right. Michael, could you give us an assessment of the economic consequences of this prolonged tension, which could go on for probably, you never know, maybe days, weeks. What does it mean for both these countries?
Well, first of all, if I may be a little bit critical of India, the problem with India's economy is not its conflict with Pakistan, or for that matter, its conflict with China. The problem with India's economy is something that's debated all the time in New Delhi, and that's onerous regulation and the size of the bureaucracy. So ultimately, whatever impact this conflict has on the Indian economy is going to be minimal. Pakistan does not have a functional economy. Pakistan is engaging in terrorism and aggression to distract the Pakistani population. Now, one of the problems Pakistan faces is similar to what Egypt faces, and that is that if ordinary Pakistanis start asking too many questions about the economy and studying it and what the true problems are, one of the major sources of weakness in the Pakistani economy is the involvement of the Pakistani military in their own economy. Just like in Egypt, one of the major problems is that the Egyptian military distorts the Egyptian economy. The Pakistani military understands that if there's ever going to be reform in the Pakistani economy, they are going to lose out, which is why they're so dead set against reform. The question is, for how long are the Pakistani people willing to be useful idiots for the Pakistani military and not recognize that the real source of their misery is the corruption of the Pakistani military, and to a lesser extent, the fact that previous Pakistani governments sold out Pakistani sovereignty to China? What good has the China-Pakistan economic corridor brought to any Pakistani? Why is Pakistan more than $40 billion in debt? The fact of the matter is, Pakistan's own leaders get rich, and they may go to Beijing and toast, while the ordinary Pakistani civilians suffer. The ordinary Pakistani civilians have no one to blame but their leaders. And they should understand that when their leaders threaten to start a war with India, it's basically because Pakistan's own leaders are so corrupt that they don't want ordinary Pakistanis knowing what they have done.
Right. What, according to you, are the most concerning military capabilities that could be deployed if the situation worsens?
Well, of course, ballistic missiles and drones. But so far, India's defenses have shown themselves to be more than capable in this regard. What is also a concern is that other neighboring states would take advantage of this hot conflict. For example, if Pakistan realizes that it's not making inroads militarily against India, then Pakistan has an incentive to stop the violence. However, if China wants to activate Pakistan as its proxy and keep India on its toes, that itself would be very, very dangerous if China starts shipping weapons to Pakistan to continue this conflict, or conversely, starts aggression in Ladakh or in Arunachal Pradesh.
Right. Now, you've monitored this region for years. How does the current tension, as compared to the previous escalations, what is your assessment on that front?
Okay. The most obvious comparison would be to 1999. The good news is that unlike in 1999, both Pakistan and India are much more mature nuclear powers. And therefore, the opportunity of either country or any rogue major lieutenant colonel, colonel general to launch a nuclear weapon is far less than in 1999. The bad news is Pakistan's economy now is even worse than it was in 1999. And therefore, Pakistan has more to cover up and more incentive to try in desperation to distract the Pakistani people from the true state of the country in which they live.